Yeah, so greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a Pizza Pie Gaming Studio interview. And today I'm being joined by my very good friend, all the way from Kenya, Gilbert Basil. And we're going to be discussing something very, very important today. And I hope that, you're going to get a couple of lessons from this. So a short intro about Gilbert Basil, okay? He's the founder of Mali On-Chain, director at Virtual Asset Chamber of Commerce. He's a blockchain specialist lawyer at Web3 Club, and he's also director of legal and compliance at Harris Academy. So I think Basil would be the best person to tell us more about his biography, maybe some other ones I could not be able to cover, right? So, Basil, can you share your background in Web3 gaming and how has been your journey, in navigating the African gaming legal landscape?
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for having me on board. So, my journey into Web3 gaming is deeply rooted in a long-standing passion for gaming, particularly my beginning on flagship platforms such as, the Xbox and the PlayStation when I was still young. Now, from early experiences with such major titles, uh, I had a redefined digital immersion and community engagement, and I quickly became fascinated by how gaming evolved with new technologies and how much potential it had, particularly for Africa. Now, unfortunately, I've been able to witness firsthand how most flagship platforms are yet to reach most of African markets and leaving a very significant gap in access to global gaming experiences across the continent. Now, this made my transition to exploring Web3 in gaming in terms of its natural evolution. And while I'm still invested in the gaming industry, I became intrigued by the utility of blockchain in creating unique digital economies and decentralized gaming models where players could truly own their assets. I believe, for instance, Web3 enables one to own in-game items such as NFTs and to even trade them across platforms and possibly to even earn income through play-to-earn models. And I believe that this shift toward player empowerment, where in-game assets have value and ownership, has very immense potential in regions like Africa, where digital entrepreneurship could greatly benefit from such opportunities. So, of course, I've encountered critical legal issues in the process, now merging my passion for gaming, Web3 gaming, and legal issues. And especially on intellectual property issues and protection of digital assets, uh, data privacy risks, and consumer protection, it's become very clear that Web3's decentralized nature could complicate regulatory compliance. And my background has been invaluable in navigating some of these issues, particularly in adapting traditional concepts that we already have in the traditional practice areas of law to decentralized ecosystems. And for example, I'd say protecting intellectual property rights for user-generated content and understanding how data privacy laws like the GDPR that we have in the European Union and for maybe local countries such as Kenya, for example, we have the Data Protection Act and how they apply to decentralized network has been both complex and very essential. And I think it's some of the good um, areas of studies. And I believe my experience navigating these challenges has deepened my commitment to making Web3 gaming legally accessible and inclusive across the continent. I might have not gotten maybe official platforms to do the same, but I believe there is expertise and there is capability for the same to operate within Africa. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, you have made a very, very valuable point, and thank you for this point. I think the one that caught my attention most was, because when you look at the entire Web3 gaming industries and all of that, there's not really a clear global regulations yet. Also looking at the African
Yeah.
market, there's not really a clear regulation yet. So being a
Yeah.
legal expert, because of your interest in Web3 gaming, you have decided since you don't have any legal framework yet, you don't want to give up, right? So
Yeah, for sure.
you have keep on fighting to see what we can do to have, very clear regulations whereby we can be able to navigate, this landscape. Yeah, thank you for that very valuable point. I think is very, very critical to our audience that, you guys are working tirelessly. All through, we know that there might not be a clear, pathway yet in terms of legal framework and all of that, but you guys are working 24 hours every day to make sure that, in future and in time to come, we have a pathway whereby people play to earn, people's database, IP can actually be secured, without being violated, right? So,
Yeah.
thank you. So I have a kind of another very important question for you. So, which has to do with, when it comes to what are the main intellectual property considerations, you have actually encountered in the African Web3 gaming, okay? And secondly, which protection do you find the most relevant, to safeguarding digital assets?
Okay. In African Web3 gaming, I believe intellectual property considerations will be very crucial. As the fusion of blockchain technology, the digital assets bit of it, and gaming content introduces very complex intellectual property issues that have significant implications, not only for game developers, but also for content creators on these platforms and some of the platform owners themselves. So I believe relevant intellectual property considerations and protections for safeguarding some of the digital assets that will be involved in Web3 gaming include number one, ownership and licensing of digital assets.
Okay.
Now, a primary intellectual property consideration is defining the ownership of, let's say, NFTs, for example, as non-fungible tokens and in-game assets, as they can represent valuable digital items. For example, those of you play Fortnite understand the character skins, items such as virtual land. Now, while blockchain can confirm a player's ownership of an NFT, it does not automatically translate or confer intellectual property rights over the underlying asset. So in that sense, uh, ownership and licensing has to be very distinct and clear on that. Then on licensing agreements, most Web3 games, I believe, will need very clear licensing structures that specify whether the game developer retains the rights over the original intellectual property, or he then grants users limited licenses. For instance, we've seen Yuga Labs, for instance, where the creator of the Bored Ape Yacht Club grants holders a commercial license to
Yeah.
use their NFTs in derivative works, which sets a valuable precedent for similar NFT-based gaming in Africa. Now, explicit licensing is also essential to avoid disputes over the extent of use and the rights that come with it. And I think another item under the ownership and licensing of the same uh, would be tokenomics and how they relate to intellectual property rights. Now, how we understand GameFi models, they often use tokens that players earn through gameplay. So it is important that tokenomics are structured in a way that players can understand what rights they possess regarding earned assets, such as maybe utility rights within the game, as compared to commercial rights outside of the game. Now, we also have copyright issues in virtual worlds. Um, I believe game content and derivative works in relation to protecting their copyrights. For example, the characters that have been developed, the storylines within the games and other type of works are very important. And copyright law in many African countries aligns with what's known as the Berne Convention that offers protection to original works without formal registration. And you will realize that copyrights normally behave a bit different from, other intellectual property rights such as patents or trademarks, in that copyrights don't necessarily need application for them to be granted the rights because they accrue the moment, the creation is made. But it's a bit different for digital assets, which require additional protection mechanisms, given, the decentralized nature of things and how it, operates outside the traditional perception of the laws that we already understand.
Okay.
Then, under copyright issues, we might want to consider user-generated content. Now, many Web3 games allow players to create in-game content, as I had mentioned, and legal frameworks should clarify if players own user-generated content or it becomes the developer's IP upon registration. Then now issues of trademarks for digital brands and assets, because you understand trademarks are normally used to protect, brand identities, what the user ends up seeing, or let's say a logo or a slogan that the gamer associates with a certain brand. So it's very important to protect these brands, and trademark law would probably play a very essential role in protecting game brands. Again, character names, symbols that are attributed to tokens.
Yeah.
And as gaming communities grow, counterfeit in-game assets or misleading representations can emerge, as have also been present in other legal areas, and could probably damage brand reputation. So with Africa's diverse market, games targeting specific countries must consider both global and local trademark registrations. So you should probably utilize platforms such as ARIPO, which is the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, for multi-country intellectual property protection in Africa, which is normally advisable for broader coverage. So you realize that for local intellectual property protection, we normally have organizations or institutions that are charged with that. For example, in Kenya, we have KIPI, which protects intellectual property locally. But now, if you'd like to expand, let's say Africa-wise, ARIPO would be the way to go. We might also want to consider trade secrets and proprietary algorithms. I believe GameFi applications often use proprietary algorithms for randomization, rewards, and even gameplay mechanics. And I believe in this sense, trade secrets are highly relevant to protect this code and prevent unfair competition. If at all, other competitors would be able to access these proprietary algorithms. So that would be something to consider. You might also want to consider smart contracts and their utility in Web3 gaming or GameFi. So smart contracts in GameFi are normally used to automate in-game transactions, could be utilized in token distributions and even staking. So protecting the code as a trade secret or under copyright, because naturally codes are normally protected under copyright, but I believe you can also protect them as a code secret if at all you show, the necessity for that. And in the context of African development, maintaining the security of such smart contracts might also, limit the accessibility of the intellectual property, but in turn helps protect the core intellectual property, ensuring that transaction logic is secure, especially as Africa blockchain gaming is growing. So you might want to consider whether you'd like to share such information with the competitors to grow the industry, or have yourself as an industry leader and secure that trade secret to remain as only of your industry. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. Thank you. I love the way you explain everything. You break it down. You also, trying to add the differences between copyright, licensing, trademark. I think these terms, they have different meaning, in the legal
Yeah.
framework when it comes to gaming. So it's very important that we know the difference between all of them, right? So,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
yeah. So most importantly, we are trying to, secure your brand logo, making sure that somebody does not steal your intellectual property. There is the need for you to make sure that you comply with all the laws. You have a license, you have your legal framework sorted out, you have your copyright secured. I mean, I think the importance of trying to follow the legal processes of building a company, building your brand and your logo is not something that we should actually overlook. It's very, very key and vital. Yeah, so thank you for that beautiful insight there. I know our audience might be wondering what could actually be the next question. Okay, so like what I have here for you is quite simple. What are the legal challenges that are most pressing? So what are the legal challenges that are most pressing today when you want to incorporate blockchain? I know you mentioned NFT when you're trying to answer the second question. So what are the most pressing legal challenges when you're trying to incorporate blockchain or maybe NFT into African Web3 games, and how can African developers, builders, I think they call them Unreal engineers, people that build games, how can they achieve compliance, with evolving regulation? Because I can't just wake up tomorrow and say, I want to start building a game, okay? There should be a regulation in place that will guide me. If not, the market can actually be saturated with a lot of fake scams and all of that, right? So what are
Yeah.
those pressing challenges, when you want to incorporate blockchain, maybe NFT, into your games, and what can developers do to stay compliant when they're building games?
I think to that, generally in my experience, African developers face unique hurdles, given that in Africa currently there are very varied regulatory frameworks across different nations. Different nations are at different positions in terms of advancing general Web3 regulations, and it's not just in GameFi, but the whole Web3 space in general. And I think achieving compliance in this will involve a combination of proactive adaptation and a couple of innovative approaches, given that, most laws that we tend to look at or principles that we adopt are from foreign countries that are already advanced, but you also need to appreciate the, intricacies of the African legal environment and the space. So number one, I believe on regulatory, there's regulatory uncertainty, and despite that, we still need to comply with emerging laws such as blockchain laws. And I think the challenge in this is that regulatory frameworks in Africa around blockchain are still very nascent. And I think there are few countries that have done well in regards to the same. Countries such as South Africa have made progress by having proper definitions of cryptocurrencies and proposing more clear regulations. And many others are either undecided or are dealing with a lot of cautious, restrictive approaches. Given, for example, in Kenya, there's a cautionary notice from the CBK that has been lingering over our heads for the last 10 years that makes it very difficult to adopt uh, regulation around the same. And I think the solution for this is developers should work with, at least legal personnel in the area to monitor regulations around uh, key jurisdictions that they would like to operate in, and consider compliance frameworks in those countries. And they may also benefit from collaborating with the local legal advisors who are experienced in blockchain, so that they are able to stay on top of regulatory changes as and when they happen, and to also participate in policy discussions through industry bodies such as the African Blockchain Alliance or regional chambers of commerce. In Kenya, we have the Virtual Asset Chamber of Commerce that is currently leading a lot of policy recommendations in the Web3 space. So should look to work with such entities. On issues of data privacy and data protection requirements, I believe the challenge is that Web3 games often rely on blockchain, which can expose personal data through on-chain transactions. Of course, blockchain is secure, but in a way, it is possible to that personal data is exposed, and for that, compliance with the data protection laws, such as let's say the Kenya Data Protection Act or Nigeria's data protection regulation, is very crucial to avoid penalties.
Yeah.
And I believe African developers, while working with the product council while developing their products, or the legal guys they work with, should seek to integrate privacy by design principles, which ensure that on-chain data does not include sensitive personal data or sensitive personal information. And for instance, the usual zero knowledge proofs or privacy-focused chains that limit exposure of personal data would have so much utility in this case. And, appointment of data protection officers or engaging with data protection authorities, preferably data protection officers who also understand some intricacies of Web3, because it's not enough for them to be, just data protection officers. They need to understand what they're dealing with and the nature of blockchain itself. For consumer protection, I believe this is a very, very big concern for Africa across any jurisdiction,
Mhm.
and especially concerning items such as NFTs and in-game purchases. Now, the challenge is that NFTs represent digital ownership, but they come with a lot of volatility and risk, which may lead to consumer protection issues in jurisdictions where consumer protection laws are very rigorous, such as South Africa or even Kenya. Transparency regarding the terms of sale for the same and the rights that are attached to NFTs and the game tokens economy, I believe will be legally necessary for them to operate, to act ultra vires or to be within the scope of whatever they're supposed to do. But then I believe the solution to this would be to be very transparent about this risk beforehand and clarify this ownership and to distinguish between the rights within the game and outside the game. Because again, the rights within the game and outside the game, as they accrue, are not the same. So one thing that developers can adopt is something known as disclaimers about NFT's value and secondary market risks so as to safeguard players from potential financial loss. And what disclaimers do is they let the gamers know beforehand, such
Yeah.
that they are not able to say, what, we weren't informed of this. Had I known of this risk, then I'd not be able to partake in this. So that's on consumer protection. Uh, then, given that it's again gaming and still has data protection issues, and there's a lot of cross-border interaction, especially on now to do with tax, we might want to consider cross-border taxation and currency controls and how they operate as developers who are building this product, as people who will be marketing the products and all. Uh, Web3 games often incorporate cryptocurrency transactions in a way, and I think developers face a lot of issues around currency controls and taxation of digital assets. As I mentioned, it's a very uh, unregulated space, although there's much that is being, progressively seen to be done in Africa. Uh, and I think it's even more important when dealing with multiple jurisdictions. I think you guys have seen Nigeria has very strict currency controls, although it's slowly opening up to the space. That is the current situations. And there are nations that have crypto-specific taxes. Others are still trying to understand crypto before they can appropriately tax, different types of assets. As for example, stable coins and crypto coins don't necessarily operate the same way, and hence taxing them in the same way or a blanket way would not really make sense. Uh,
Incredible.
Again, the solution for this would be, if possible, establishment of clear tax strategies and potentially partnering with financial advisors, legal advisors who understand the crypto regulations in the space, tax compliance where you can with the already traditional systems that have been established, and so on and so forth. And if that's not possible, you might want to explore crypto-friendly jurisdictions such as Mauritius that, ease a lot of tax burdens and currency control issues. I've already spoken about intellectual property rights issues. There are also issues of fraud, anti-money laundering, and counter-terrorism financing, and issues to do with the KYC. Comply with those whenever possible. And I think something that's has been, disturbing most people is governance and legal structuring of decentralized autonomous organization, which is a big, big thing. DAOs, that is. Uh, DAOs in their structuring, or at least how I've seen them operate in different jurisdictions, do not necessarily follow the traditional legal structures of entities that we have. And even if we were to adopt the traditional structures for DAOs, there are some elements of DAOs that will not be uh, efficiently covered by the existing structures for the current entities that we have. So we might want to set up DAOs as developers who are working on such projects in jurisdictions with very supportive frameworks. Like, for example, I know of the Marshall Islands, and I know of the Wyoming state in USA, for example, that has, structures for DAOs specifically away from the traditional entities that we have, the PLCs and such entities. We also need to tailor governance structures to avoid conflicts with local laws. And these legal structures should be able to provide clear management framework. And I believe they'll make African DAOs more resilient and legally defensible. And I think a case example of this would be how compliance um, has been done by Axie Affinity, for example, which faced similar problems. But, dealing with multi-jurisdictional structures, maintaining transparency and detailed user agreements, they established a robust compliance framework. And I believe African developers would be able to also benefit from this by creating regional specific compliance policies and setting up operations in favorable jurisdictions. And I
Yeah.
believe, all
Yeah.
will be well with that.
Yeah, I think in summary, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think in summary of what you're saying, it's very, very important that as a developer, as a builder, if you don't understand the legal terms, guiding building games, it's important that you have a lawyer in your team, right? So
Yeah,
you don't go violating the laws, building a system, that violate people's intellectual properties and data, right? So that is
for
where we
sure.
have company like us, PizzaPie comes in. We help
Hmm.
Web3 gaming studios to stay compliant. Not only that, anywhere you operate in the world, we can help you to stay compliant, right? To operate
Yeah,
anywhere in the world, right? So thank you for
yeah,
that powerful input. I think it's very important that anything we do, you see why, like for instance, recently, I think early this year, maybe second quarter of this year, Binance had issue with Nigeria, and this will
yeah,
be compliant, right? So because of that, you have to leave the Nigerian market. So you don't want to build a product that will be that kind of situation. Maybe you operate a couple of years, along the line you have issue with the regulations. So it's important that as you build your product, as a developer, you build your product, you stay compliant, right? If you are confused about how to go about it, you can hire a lawyer, or you can contact company like PizzaPie. We help you to we cover your compliant part of building your product anywhere in the world globally. So the other question I have for you, as we round up on this session is in the context of Web3 decentralization, right? So what legal measures or policies, are in place across the African continent, okay, to protect players' rights and data privacy in gaming space. Like me and you, we can be players. We can play. I know I've heard about it was Isuku games from Kenya, so many other games from Kenya, right? So what
yeah.
kind of, in the context of, Web3 decentralized, you don't have any central entity controlling it, okay? So what are we going to do? What measures of police are we going to have in place across Africa to protect the right of the players and, data privacy? Yeah.
I believe around African Web3 gaming, probably legal measures and policies related to player rights and their data privacy. I believe they're still evolving to keep pace with the demand of decentralization, because as I've said, decentralization, how it works is a bit different from the more traditional areas that, laws have been governing in Africa. So I think several African countries have begin to address data privacy concerns within the digital environments, but there's still much need for specific guidelines tailored to Web3 gaming. Now, on data privacy, for example, countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, even Ghana, have very robust data protection laws, which generally apply to any digital interaction involving personal data. So, with that, Web3 will also be covered. And for instance, South Africa's Protection of Personal Information Act and the Kenya's Data Protection Act aim to secure personal data by regulating how it is collected, how it is processed, and how it is also stored. Now, in applying this to Web3, these laws can apply on Web3 gaming platforms, especially if these platforms collect any personally identifiable information as part of user registration and transaction logging. And due to the pseudonymous nature of blockchain, I believe developers can uh, often attempt to limit data collection, relying on wallet addresses rather than direct personal identifiable information. And nonetheless, um, if these wallets link back to the identifiable individuals, they fall under the remit of privacy regulations. So as much as possible, these wallets should not be able to, openly link back to personally identifiable information that can show who the user is, unless now it's under the scope of, legal investigation, which is one of the areas that they'll have to exempt that. And I think the challenge with this will be enforcing data privacy in decentralized environments. And for example, when a player is stored on blockchain, it becomes immutable and it cannot be deleted easily. As we normally have a right known as the right to be forgotten or the right of erasure under data protection laws. So African regulators, I believe, are actively exploring how such requirements can align with decentralized technology. And I think I'd be pleased to say on the right to be forgotten, it's a topic that I've really been pushing in legal forums, especially in relation to Web3. You might have seen my interactions at the Blockchain Lawyers Forum, where I've presented, uh, in collaboration with a firm in Switzerland known as Schellenberg Whitmer. We've had CMS in London. I've spoken about or I've raised issues to do with the right to be forgotten and how do we handle it around issues to do with Web3, because you realize
Yeah.
for data protection in itself, it normally involves, a processor or a controller who's normally an intermediary.
Mm.
In that sense, it could be a natural person or a legal person. But looking at Web3 and how it works, we realize Web3's aim is generally to eliminate the middleman. So
Oh,
how then do we handle such issues in Web3? Is it that when such breaches occur, then do we hold accountable the developers' code, or what then do we do in that instance? So those are some of the topics that are going around in relation to data privacy and Web3.
yeah, I think
On
it's a
consumer,
very yeah, yeah. I think it's a very this is a very robust topic, that we cannot even finish discussing today. And I'm happy that you guys are making effort because already there's existing laws, in the Web2 ecosystem to prevent players' rights and data privacy, right? So because we are
yeah,
running out of time, so my final question for you, I want to get your final thought on this within 2 minutes. Okay. So as
yeah.
African Web3 gaming industry look to scale, what legal consideration, do you believe that we should prioritize to support sustainable growth in the African Web3 ecosystem? So maybe you can put your thought in summary and every other thing in maybe in 2 minutes or thereabout. Yeah.
Okay, so on this, I think I have a couple of things in mind, but I'll just mention them as we go. Maybe those who want to interact with me on the same, I can give deeper insights. But I think first of all, we need very clear and harmonized regulatory frameworks for digital assets and blockchain. We also need to understand the interplay of intellectual property rights for digital and user-generated content as concerns Web3 gaming. Issues to do with data privacy and security regulations have to be tailored with an understanding of decentralized systems, or have a separate way of handling decentralized systems with the knowledge of how they operate in regards to data privacy and security regulations. We also have to have a great focus on consumer protection for financial and tokenized game economies to prevent the exploitation of the gamers. Have in mind KYC and anti-money laundering compliance uh, issues around in-game transactions and NFTs, and again in proper frameworks for DAOs and decentralized governance structures. We might want to also look at cybersecurity standards for dApps and smart contracts around the same. And very much important is to build education and capacity building for policymakers, industry stakeholders, and even the end users around Web3. So, and I think an example of a forward-thinking framework that would probably encompass all of this is the UAE's Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, uh, which has created clear regulations for virtual assets and aims to balance innovation with regulatory oversight. Um, VARA supports the responsible growth of Web3 initiatives while also ensuring very high standards of data privacy, compliance with the anti-money laundering laws, and cybersecurity. So I believe a similar approach in Africa could help align national regulations with global best practice while also establishing Africa as a conducive region for Web3 gaming in general. Yeah.
Wow. That is a very, very powerful point. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. So if you run a Web3 gaming studio in Africa, maybe a builder, you're a game developer, and you don't understand about regulation and compliance, around what you're building, feel free to reach out to PizzaPie, and our team will be able to help you to build your game forward. You can simply visit pizzapie.com and you can see what we do and how we can partner and collaborate with you. So on this note, I want to thank my guest today, Basil Gilbert, all the way from Kenya. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to do this more again in the future. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jude, for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the work of Pixel Pie in the space.